Have you ever felt like your life is falling apart? But deep down, a strange whisper tells you it's actually falling into place. You think you've been buried, but the truth is, you've been planted. This is the story of Silas, a man who lost everything to find the one thing that mattered. Watch closely, because if you see your own struggle in his, God might be calling you next. Sign #1, the removal of comforts. Sign #2, the attack of the enemy. Silas Thorne stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass of the conference room on the 42nd floor, looking down at the city of Seattle. He wasn't just looking at the skyline, he was looking at his kingdom. At 34, Silas was the youngest partner in the history of Sterling and Harrows, the most prestigious architectural firm on the West Coast. He adjusted his silk tie, checking his reflection. Perfect. Today was the day he signed the Apex project, a $500 million luxury casino and hotel complex that would cement his legacy. He had sacrificed everything for this, his sleep, his ethics, and, though he wouldn't admit it, his relationship with his parents, whom he hadn't called in 3 years. The heavy oak doors swung open. It wasn't the clients. It was Grant, his mentor and the senior partner. Flanking him were 2 security guards and a woman Silas recognized from the legal department. "Silas," Grant said, his voice devoid of the warmth it usually held over scotch and cigars. "Please step away from the window." Silas frowned, a cold prickle of unease running down his spine. "Grant, the investors are due in 10 minutes. What's going on?" "The investors aren't coming," Grant said, tossing a thick manila folder onto the mahogany table. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the silent room. "We found the discrepancies in the escrow accounts, Silas. The wire transfers to offshore shell companies under your name." Silas laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "What are you talking about? I build skyscrapers, Grant. I don't touch the accounts." "The digital trail says otherwise," the legal rep interjected, stepping forward. "Embezzlement. $3 million. The police are waiting in the lobby. We're doing you the courtesy of letting you leave via the freight elevator, so you aren't cuffed in front of the press." The twist. Silas's world tilted. He lunged for the file, flipping it open. There were signatures. His signatures. Or at least perfect forgeries of them. He looked up at Grant, searching his eyes for a joke, a reprieve. He saw only cold ambition. Suddenly, Silas remembered a conversation from a month ago. He had told Grant about the security flaw in the firm's digital ledger. He had trusted Grant with the keys to the kingdom. "You framed me," Silas whispered, the air leaving his lungs. "You needed a fall guy for the Apex losses." Grant didn't flinch. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper. "Or you were always too ambitious for your own good, Silas. God resists the proud. Isn't that what your father, the preacher, used to say?" The collapse. The next 48 hours were a blur of humiliation. Silas was arraigned, his assets frozen. The media tore him apart. The prodigy architect turned thief. But the true breaking point didn't happen in the courtroom. It happened in his penthouse apartment 3 days later. Lydia, his fiancée, was packing her bags. She wasn't crying. That was the worst part. She was methodical, folding her designer clothes with chilling precision. "Lydia, please," Silas pleaded, standing amidst the ruins of his life. "It's a frame-up. I can fight this. I just need time." She zipped the suitcase shut and looked at him. "It's not just the money, Silas. Look at you. You've been hollow for years. You chased this status, this power, and now that it's gone, there's nothing left of you to love." She left the ring on the counter. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was heavier than concrete. Biblical wisdom application. This was the first sign of the calling, total separation. God often allows our false foundations to crumble so he can build something real. Silas felt destroyed, but he was actually being stripped. The idols of money, reputation, and false love were being forcibly removed. Silas sat on the floor of his empty apartment, the darkness gathering around him. He had no job, no money, no fiancé, and a looming trial. He screamed at the ceiling, a raw, guttural sound of rage. "Why?" he roared. "I worked harder than anyone. I did everything right." There was no answer, only the terrifying realization that he was utterly alone. But in the silence, a strange, terrifying thought crossed his mind, a thought that didn't feel like his own. Now you are finally ready to listen. Sign #3. Deep isolation and loneliness. Sign #4. A burden for the broken. 6 months later. The high-rise views were gone. Silas was living in a damp studio apartment above a laundromat in the Rust District, the part of the city developers like Sterling and Harrows pretended didn't exist. His legal team, paid for by liquidating his retirement fund, had managed to get the criminal charges dropped due to insufficient evidence. But his reputation was incinerated. No firm would hire him. The Architectural Guild had suspended his license pending an investigation. Silas, the man who designed skylines, was now working the graveyard shift as a janitor at a city hospital. The grind? It was 3 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday. Silas was mopping the hallway of the ER, the smell of antiseptic burning his nose. His back ached. His hands, once used to holding expensive drafting pens, were calloused and cracked from bleach. He felt invisible. Doctors he might have once dined with walked past him without a glance, stepping over his wet floor sign. "I am nobody," Silas thought, a bitter taste in his mouth. "I am a ghost. This was the wilderness season. It is the place where God hides his chosen ones to kill their pride. Moses spent 40 years in the desert. David hid in caves. Silas was cleaning vomit off linoleum. He finished his shift and walked out into the cold morning rain. He couldn't afford a car anymore, so he walked the 3 miles home. His route took him past the foundry, an abandoned steel mill that covered a whole city block. It was a jagged, ugly scar of rusted metal and broken windows, fenced off with barbed wire. Usually Silas walked past it with his head down, but today something stopped him. The vision. A group of homeless men were huddled under the awning of the factory's side entrance, trying to light a fire in a trash can. One of them was coughing, a wet, rattling sound that signaled pneumonia. Silas froze. He watched a woman push a shopping cart full of blankets toward them, sharing what little she had. Suddenly the grey world around him seemed to shift. Silas didn't see the rusted steel mill anymore. For a split second, an image flashed over his vision, vivid and high definition. He saw the factory walls replaced with reinforced glass. He saw the cold concrete floor covered in warm, polished wood. He saw the main smelting floor converted into a massive dining hall and medical clinic. He saw the upper catwalks turned into safe, private sleeping quarters. It wasn't a casino. It wasn't a hotel. It was a sanctuary. The vision was so intense it made him dizzy. He staggered back, clutching the chain-link fence. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Hey, you okay, buddy?" Silas blinked, the vision fading. A man was standing on the other side of the fence. He was older, with a beard like steel wool and eyes that seemed to hold a century of sadness. He wore a ragged army jacket. I'm fine," Silas stammered. The old man squinted at him. "You were staring at the building like you were trying to talk to it." "It's a ruin," Silas muttered, turning to leave. "It should be condemned." "Condemned?" The old man chuckled, a dry, raspy sound. "That's what they say about us, too. But the foundation is good. Solid bedrock. Just need someone who knows how to see the bones." The old man's words hit Silas like a physical blow. See the bones. That was an architectural term. How did this homeless man know that? "Who are you?" Silas asked. "Name's Tobias," the man said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, charred piece of wood. He tossed it through the fence. Silas caught it instinctively. It was a piece of charcoal. "You look like a man who needs to draw something, son. Get it out of your head before it drives you crazy." The burden. Silas walked home, the piece of charcoal burning a hole in his pocket. He tried to sleep, but he couldn't. Sign #5. The divine disturbance. Insomnia. Biblical wisdom teaches that when God calls, He often disturbs our sleep. He wakes us to pray or to plan. Silas tossed and turned. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the foundry. Not as it was, but as it could be. He saw the engineering schematics. He calculated the load-bearing capacity of the trusses. He visualized the ventilation systems. It was maddening. He wasn't an architect anymore. He was a janitor. He had no money, no license, and no influence. To even think about a project like this was insanity. Why show me this? He argued with the empty room. I can't do anything. I'm broken. But the burden is a hallmark of the calling. It's a heaviness for a specific problem that you cannot shake. Nehemiah wept for the walls of Jerusalem. Silas was weeping for a rusted factory. Finally, at 5 a.m., Silas gave up. He got out of bed, grabbed a stack of cheap printer paper he'd stolen from the hospital trash, and took the piece of charcoal Tobias had given him. He began to draw. His hand moved with a speed and fluidity he hadn't felt in years. When he designed the casino, it was calculated, cold and mathematical. This was different. This was flowing. He sketched the dormitories, the kitchen, the intake center. He designed a water filtration system using the existing pipes. By the time the sun rose, the floor of his apartment was covered in sketches. Silas stood back, his hands black with charcoal, sweat dripping down his forehead. He looked at the drawings. They were brilliant, better than anything he had done at Stirling and Harrow's. But then reality crashed back in. A loud banging on his door made him jump. "Thorne, open up!" It was the landlord. "Rent was due 2 days ago. I know you're in there." Silas looked at the masterpiece on the floor, then at the peeling paint of his door. The contrast was laughable. He was designing a multi-million-dollar sanctuary for the poor while he was about to be thrown onto the street himself. He opened the door. The landlord, a beefy man named Crunk, crossed his arms. "You got the money?" "I get paid Friday," Silas said, his voice weary. "Friday isn't today," Crunk spat. He looked past Silas and saw the papers on the floor. He stepped inside, his dirty boots trampling over a sketch of the clinic's atrium. "Hey," Silas shouted, shoving the man back. "Watch where you step." Crunk laughed. "Or what? You play an artist now. Get the cash by tonight or your stuff is on the curb, and take this trash with you." Crunk kicked the pile of drawings, scattering them, and slammed the door. Silas fell to his knees, frantically gathering the papers. He picked up the drawing Crunk had stepped on. A muddy boot print marred the center of the design. He stared at the mud. Tears of frustration welled in his eyes. "I can't do this," he whispered to God. "I have nothing. You picked the wrong man." At the twist. As he smoothed out the crumpled paper, he noticed something on the back of one of the recycled hospital sheets he had used. It wasn't blank. It was a printed email someone had discarded. It was a memo from the City Planning Commission. Subject: Urgent Demolition Order, Sector 4, Target the Old Foundry. Date: October 15th. Silas checked his phone. Today was October 12th. They were going to blow up the building in 3 days. The calling wasn't just a gentle nudge anymore. It was a ticking clock. Silas had 3 days to save a building he didn't own, with money he didn't have, to serve a God he was still angry at. He grabbed his coat. He didn't know how, but he knew he had to find Tobias. Sign #6, the unlikely alliance, supernatural connection. Sign #7, the war at the gate, resistance. The rain had turned into a deluge, blurring the neon lights of the city into streaks of running watercolor. Silas ran. He ran until his lungs burned, clutching the charcoal sketches inside his coat to keep them dry. When he reached the chain-link fence of the foundry, the homeless camp was gone. Cleared out, a yellow danger demolition zone sign rattled against the metal mesh in the wind. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced his chest. "Tobias!" Silas screamed, gripping the wet fence. "Tobias!" There was no answer, only the groan of the dying steel mill settling into the mud. Silas collapsed against the fence, sliding down to the wet pavement. He was too late. The system, the very machine of progress and profit he had spent his life oiling, had moved faster than he could. Looking for the old man? Silas snapped his head up. A black sedan was parked 20 yards away, its engine idling. The window rolled down. It was a woman. Silas squinted through the rain. He recognized the sharp jawline, the severe glasses. It was Sarah, the legal representative from Sterling and Harrow's, who had handed him his termination papers 6 months ago. She was the one who had watched him pack his box, her face unreadable. Silas stood up slowly, defensive. "Here to deliver another lawsuit, Sarah? Get in the car, Silas," she said, her voice tight, "before Grant sees you." "It's at the safe house." Silas hesitated, then opened the door and slid into the leather interior. The warmth of the heater hit his soaked skin like a physical shock. Sarah didn't look at him. She drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. They drove in silence for 20 minutes until she pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town. "Why are you here?" Silas asked, his voice hoarse. Sarah pulled a file from her briefcase and tossed it into his lap. It was stamped with the Sterling and Harrow's seal. "Because I couldn't sleep," she whispered, finally looking at him. Her eyes were rimmed with red. "6 months ago, I did my job. I processed the paperwork. But the numbers didn't add up, Silas. The metadata on the transfers, it was too clean. I've been digging ever since." Silas opened the file. It wasn't about his embezzlement charges. It was about the foundry. "Grant isn't just demolishing that mill," Sarah said, pointing at the map. "Look at the zoning permit." Silas traced the line. The foundry was sitting on the exact plot designated for the Apex Project's overflow parking lot. The realization hit Silas like a hammer to the gut. The vision he had seen, the sanctuary, the clinic, the home for the broken, was being destroyed to make room for parking for the casino he had designed. "I built this," Silas whispered, horror dawning on him. "I designed the monster that is eating my calling." "The demolition hearing is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at City Hall," Sarah said. "Grant has the mayor in his pocket. They are going to rubber stamp the destruction order. Once that gavel falls, the bulldozers roll." "I have to stop him," Silas said. "How?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "You're a disgraced janitor. He's the most powerful architect in the city. You can't just walk in there." Silas reached into his coat and pulled out the crumpled, charcoal-smeared drawings. He spread them on the dashboard. "I don't have money," Silas said, his voice gaining a sudden, terrifying steadiness. "And I don't have a reputation. But I have these." Sarah looked at the sketches. She saw the atrium, the medical bays, the dignity woven into the lines of the structure. She saw the soul of the building. She looked back at Silas, and for the first time, she didn't see a broken man. She saw something dangerous. She saw a man who had nothing left to lose. The twist. "There's one problem," Sarah said. "The deed. Grant claims the city owns the property because of unpaid taxes. But in my research, I found a trust. The original ironworker who built the foundry in 1920 left it to his descendants." "Who is the descendant?" Silas asked. "A man named Tobias Vance," Sarah said. "But he's been missing for 10 years. Presumed dead." Silas felt the air leave the car. The old man at the fence. The man with the charcoal. "He's not dead," Silas whispered. "He's waiting for me." Biblical wisdom. Application. Here, Silas encounters sign #7. Resistance. The enemy, Grant, isn't just a bad boss. He represents the spirit of Babylon. The system that values profit over people. But simultaneously, Silas sees sign #6, the ram in the thicket. Just as Abraham found a ram to sacrifice in place of Isaac, God provided Sarah, an insider within the enemy's camp, to provide the key Silas needed. "Drive back," Silas commanded. "We have to find him. If Tobias signs the rights over to the foundry project before 9 a.m., Grant can't touch the building." They spent the entire night searching the alleys, the underpasses, the shelters. The rain never stopped. It was a descent into the hell Silas had ignored from his penthouse for years. At 4 a.m., they found him. Tobias was sleeping under a cardboard lean-to behind a dumpster, shivering violently. Silas knelt in the mud, ruining his only pair of work pants. He shook the old man gently. "Tobias, it's Silas, the man with the charcoal." Tobias opened his eyes. They were cloudy, feverish. "You drew it?" he rasped. "Did you draw the bones?" "I drew them," Silas said, choking back tears. "But I need you to sign something. I need you to claim your inheritance, Tobias." The old man laughed, a weak, rattling sound. "I don't want it. It's just rust." "It's not rust," Silas shouted, the rain mixing with the tears on his face. "It's a sanctuary. God showed me. But I can't build it without you." Tobias looked at Silas, really looked at him. He saw the janitor's uniform, the desperation, the fire. He saw a man who had been stripped of his pride. "Okay," Tobias whispered, "but not for me. For them." He pointed to a stray dog seeking shelter nearby. Sarah produced the legal document and a pen. With a shaking hand, Tobias Vance signed his name. Sign #8, the peace that passes understanding. Sign #9, the new name, restoration. The City Hall Council chamber was a cavern of polished wood and hushed whispers. The air smelled of expensive cologne and floor wax. At the front of the room, Grant stood before the City Council. He looked impeccable in a navy bespoke suit, pointing to a projection screen showing a gleaming, sterile parking structure. "This demolition removes an eyesore," Grant said, his voice smooth as silk. "It increases property value for the Apex project by 15%. It is safe. It is necessary. It is progress." The mayor nodded, looking bored. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Unless there are any objections, we will proceed to the vote." "I object." The doors at the back of the chamber banged open. Silas Thorne walked in. He looked like a wreck. His janitor's uniform was stained with mud. He hadn't shaved. His hair was wet. He held a roll of papers in one hand and a legal document in the other. Sarah walked a step behind him, carrying her briefcase like a shield. A murmur rippled through the room. "Is that Silas Thorne? The embezzler? Look at him." Grant turned around, a smirk playing on his lips. "Mr. Thorne, I believe the custodial staff entrance is in the basement." Laughter rippled through the council. 6 months ago, that laughter would have killed Silas. It would have made him turn and run. But today, as he walked down the center aisle, he felt something strange. He felt sign #8. The deep peace. It was a stillness in his soul, a quiet confidence that didn't make sense considering his circumstances. He wasn't afraid of Grant. He wasn't afraid of the mayor. He wasn't afraid of the shame. Silas reached the podium. He placed the charcoal drawings on the document reader. The screen behind him flickered. The sterile parking lot vanished. In its place appeared the sketches. The room went silent. The drawings were raw, emotional, and undeniably brilliant. They showed the foundry not as a ruin, but as a fortress of hope. The charcoal strokes seemed to vibrate with life. "This is not an eyesore," Silas said, his voice quiet but echoing in the silence. "It is a lifeboat." He looked at Grant. "We build towers to reach the sky, Grant. But we forgot the people on the ground. I designed the Apex project. I know its specs, and I know that a parking lot is not worth the soul of this city." Grant stepped forward, his face reddening. "This is preposterous. You are a criminal, Thorne. You have no standing here. That building is city property." "Actually," Sarah stepped up to the microphone, her voice shaking but clear, "it belongs to Mr. Tobias Vance, and as of 4:30 this morning, Mr. Vance has transferred the deed to the Foundry Non-Profit Trust." She slammed the signed document onto the council table. Grant's face went pale. He looked at the signature. It was ironclad. "This man," Grant hissed, pointing at Silas, "stole $3 million. You're going to let him run a charity?" Silas looked at the council. He didn't defend himself. He didn't scream about the frame-up. "I lost everything," Silas said to the room, "and it was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because when I was up in that tower, looking down on you, I was blind. But down there," he pointed to the floor, "in the mud, I finally saw." He looked directly at the camera recording the session. "You can tear the building down if you want. You can arrest me, but you can't stop what's happening. God chooses the foolish things to shame the wise. He chose a janitor to build a sanctuary." The room was deadly silent. The mayor looked at the drawings. He looked at the deed. He looked at the press in the back of the room, who were frantically typing on their phones. This was a story, a redemption arc. If the mayor voted against this, he would be the villain. The gavel banged. "Motion to demolish denied," the mayor said, "pending structural review of the Foundry project." Grant stormed out, his team scrambling after him. The investigation into the Sterling and Harrow's accounts would be reopened by the FBI a week later, triggered by Sarah's evidence. Grant's house of cards was about to fall. But Silas didn't stay to gloat. He walked out of the side door into the sunlight. Sign #9, the new name. 6 months later, the foundry was open. The rust was sealed and painted a warm industrial black. The glass was reinforced. The smell of fresh bread from the kitchen wafted out onto the street. Silas stood on the balcony of the second floor. Not a penthouse, but a modest office overlooking the main hall. Below, 50 men and women were eating a hot meal. Tobias was there, clean-shaven, sitting at the head of a table, telling stories to a group of young volunteers. Silas wasn't wearing a tailored suit. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt, his sleeves rolled up, revealing arms strong from physical labor. He wasn't Silas Thorne, the prodigy architect. A young woman walked up to him. "Excuse me, are you the director?" Silas smiled. "No, I'm just the builder." He had lost his reputation, his fortune, and his pride, but as he looked out at the people he was serving, he realized he had gained the one thing he never had in the tower. He had a purpose. He had been chosen, not to be great, but to be faithful. And that was enough. Silas lost the world, but he gained his soul. Your calling will not always look like a promotion. Sometimes it looks like a demotion. It looks like a breakdown before the breakthrough. If you are in the wilderness today, if you feel buried, remember Silas. You aren't buried. You are planted. If this story spoke to your spirit, please like this video to help spread the message, and subscribe for more stories of wisdom and faith. Share this with someone who needs to know they haven't been forgotten. God bless you.